good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Kelley Coleman and Lindsay Crain. Thanks for joining us tonight. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to that channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Kelley Coleman is a feature film development executive turned author and disability advocate. She serves on committees for Children's Hospital Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Unified School District, and Canine Companions. Kelley's new book, Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Supports, stems from her own parenting experience, giving parents the tools to spend less time navigating this stuff and more time just loving their kids exactly as they are. Lindsay Crain is the head of content and community at Undivided, sharing their mission to support and empower parents raising children with disabilities. As the parent of a teenager with cerebral palsy, Lindsay is driven to build and reinforce systems and practices that create a more inclusive culture. She is currently serving as a community representative on the California State Interagency Coordinating Council on Early Intervention. And now let's welcome Kelley Coleman and Lindsay Crain.
Thank you so much. We're thrilled to be here. Thank you, everyone joining us.
Thank you, Lonnie. And Kelley, thank you. Thank you for asking me to be here. As you know, I love this book. I could talk about what's in it for years at a time because I really believe this book needs to be the book that parents buy as soon as they suspect or receive a diagnosis for their child. It's the book that I wish I would have had after my daughter was born and what I desperately needed. And it also starts the conversations that everyone needs to be having, not just parents raising kids with disabilities. And that's culture, ableism, equity, inclusion, identity, and so much more. So let's dive right in and have the conversation. I want to start, kind of at the beginning, right, with diagnosis, right? So when many parents are given a diagnosis for their child, it's often served up with some pity, or maybe just thrown out, devoid of any feeling at all. And, in most cases, we're given very limited information and we're told to come back in 6 months to a year, and that's it. We were given a never-ending list of horrible things that could happen with zero information on what to do next. No mention of public benefits, no reframing of hope. They helped us put our car seat in, which I think was the law, and that was it. Onward and good luck. So we have to be able to do better for families and children. So how can we do better for families and children?
Right from the start, parents are basically told to go home, Google, and cry. Exactly like you said, we are handed this diagnosis so often and too often with pity, with, I'm so sorry, my heart bleeds for you. This is so hard for me to say. It is hard. It is all the things. And we are left to reinvent the exact same wheels with no training, no knowledge. And most of what you find on the internet scares you. And for years, I've been hearing there should be a handbook for how to do this. And for years, I never imagined I would be the one to write that. But I'm so thrilled that I did, because I'm so passionate about serving fellow parent caregivers who are reinventing these same wheels and getting these diagnoses that are just heaping pity onto us without training for the clinicians on how to deliver diagnosis. That's part of the book. Diagnosis, working with your medical team, insurance, government benefits, IEPs, school, disability rights and advocacy, financial planning, future care plans, all this mountain of stuff. I'm so thrilled to have this foundational information, but presented in a way that is weirdly fun and conversational so that we can actually use it, so that we can move the needle for caregivers like both of us, so that we can focus on being parents and look at the job of caregiving in addition to parenting and figure out ways to make that manageable.
Well, and I know you didn't just sort of, get your son's diagnosis and show up to write a book to say, I've got it all figured out, right? And I actually wanted to read because this is what you wrote in your book about how you felt after receiving your son's diagnosis. Learning that my child was disabled made me cry every day for months. It upended every bit of my life, and it didn't need to be that way. Before Aaron was born, I would have said I was totally comfortable with disability. After he was born, I learned I was wrong. I had no real experience with disability, and I found myself Googling Blair's cousin on the show Facts of Life. That was literally what I did, because that was my frame of reference. I was creating fears based on zero real life experience or real knowledge, and that's a terrible idea. No wonder I felt like crap. So Kelley, how did you get from that moment to where you are today?
Lots of time. And even as you are reading that, I am starting to tear up, because even though my son, who is awesome and is doing great and is so happy and healthy and all the things, and will always be disabled, and that's just a factual part of who he is, it still feels so raw and emotional, because again, it was the pity and the ignorance just from every level, including my own ignorance, my own ableism and bias that I didn't realize I had. And getting from there to where I am today has been such a learning process. It is not a destination that I have arrived at and I'm done. It will be a forever learning process that is all about, of course, setting these systems in place and learning how to serve my child and learning how to do the stuff. Of course, it's about educating and re-educating myself. So much of it is about being in community with actual disabled people, with disabled adults, leaders, people who are willing to not just have big picture conversations about disability, but just hang out and be people, because we need to be learning about disability from disabled people. And I came to realize that my ignorance and this whole, so many of us grew up with the pretend you don't see that person, ignore that, pretend that person isn't there, don't say the word disabled, is so harmful and ignorant, and having to unlearn that. And I realized, oh, that's actually coming from people who are not disabled. And when I talk to disabled friends, they don't find it awkward to talk about disability because it's just information. And putting those things together, plus oh, here I go, I'm gonna cry, I'm a crier. Point A to point wherever I am now. Here I go, I'm gonna cry. Falling in love with your child because of who they are as a human. Of course, we loved him always and from the first moments because he was our baby and we adored him. But falling in love with every single part of who he is and his very unique and vibrant personality really has made all of this doable, even the really hard stuff. And when we don't talk about and acknowledge the really hard stuff, and when we pretend this is nothing but a blessing and this is wonderful and oh, this is amazing, that all can be part of it too. But the reality is my son is part of a community that I am not a part of. I am an ally. I am not disabled myself. And he will be marginalized. He will be mistreated. He will be treated in all kinds of horrible ways and discriminated against simply because he is disabled, and there is so much fear. And in my book, the first chapter became so necessary to be about getting comfortable with disability, because I don't believe we can get from point A, where we are just crying on the floor of the kitchen and eating Nutella and wondering where our pants are for months or years, to the point when we feel like this life is sustainable for me as a caregiver and for each member of our family exactly as we are. And we cannot get to that place until we really look at our own beliefs and bias and what we've been taught and what we want to learn and relearn and make it a consistent effort so that we are always learning from disabled people and doing better when we know better.
Well, and there was a lot in there because there's a lot in that journey of when you're starting, obviously, to where you are now. There's the joy, there is the stumbling, there are the moments you look back and you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I thought that. I can't believe I did that. How did I not respond in this way when somebody said this? Or, I mean, a million things like everybody can do, right? Looking back. But that's what's so beautiful about this book is that you're really laying out the information, but there's also a game plan of how to get started with the essentials. And so for families that might be watching this who are just starting on this journey, I mean, I think, you hit on a lot of them right now, but then you really lay out specifically in the book, like what are the obstacles or some of the biggest pain points that parents need to prepare for?
Parents need to prepare for their child being treated very differently and often in unkind ways. Sometimes even from the people who you would expect to step up. And that can be a very hard and emotional thing. If you anticipate that there might be relationships that will change, that will dissolve, that will need to evolve, or where if you want to stay in relationship with this person, they need to be willing to be educated, can really brace you and your family for how relationships can and will and do change. We also need to brace ourselves for knowing that the emotional roller coaster is very real. The most recent study from the National Institutes of Health has said that 94% of moms and 66% of dads experience depression and anxiety as parents of disabled children. I read that statistic and I thought that sounded low. Even the 94%. And I am not depressed and anxious because of my amazing kid with whom I watch airplanes and go swimming and sing the DuckTales theme song a lot. Like that's great. But we need to brace ourselves for the job of caregiving. And what I mean by that is learning systems, supports, neurology, gastroenterology, education, law, disability advocacy, all of these things that we are thrown into, and that our child's livelihood, health, well-being, education, future, all of the independence, all of these things, it really does feel like it rests on our shoulders. And as a parent, and especially as a mom, because that's where the responsibility often necessarily falls, we need to understand that responsibility can and does and should and will look very different when we have a kid who's disabled.
Yeah, when you're talking about all the hats, I mean, I did a presentation the other day about inclusion, and I had never put all of my daughter's providers like on a page. And it was over 64 providers that we collaborate and coordinate with between all the systems, right? Between school and private and public benefits and all of these. And it was actually even pretty shocking to me when you're thinking like 64, right? And there's multiple, like it might be a title of something. And then we've gone through 6 of those before we found the right one, right? So there's a lot more that went into that. But, with all of these, challenges and barriers and stressors, families need support, right? Emotional, logistical, financial. And as you said, there are these systems in place for that. And they're the ones that support our kids, that help sustain their lives in many cases. And they're unfortunately the same ones that can feel like they're going to break us, the parents. So, they're hard to access, and they can also be unforgivably inequitable and can look vastly different from state to state. So how can that range of services look, and how do demographics play into that?
The way that demographics plays into this is the thing that pushed me to finally write this book. It is infuriating that you can find statistics, even in states that are known for being much more supportive and robust in their services for individuals with disabilities, for supporting caregivers. Statistically speaking, if you are white, if you are able to speak English, your child will get more of what they need. And that is not okay. And that is what happens over and over. And we need to serve one another as caregivers by radically sharing our information. And part of that is knowing and acknowledging that even under the same federal guidelines, each state delivers services and supports very differently. Each state has a Department of Developmental Services, and within that, there are different versions of early childhood services, school age services, lifelong services. In order to access those, you need to understand how your state defines disability, because in some states, my child would qualify for public benefits. In other states, he might not. And families often don't have the luxury of moving from one state to the next, because the idea of trying to access services under a very differently run system is not only daunting, often impossible. And we need more disabled people in positions of leadership in our government. If you are disabled, if you know anyone who is, please run for office. If these systems were run by the people they are serving, they would be much more functional. Even in a well-functioning system, you can expect wait lists, you can expect overworked caseworkers, you can expect school districts who will push back even on the most basic of things. It is so much to process. And if we really care about inclusion for everyone, when we have the capacity, we need to join the Black Student Success Committee at our school district. We need to join the board of our local state services agency. We need to join a diversity and inclusion group where we can elevate those people who the groups are serving, and we can really focus on equitable services for all people with disabilities, because that is what serves everyone.
Right. Because while we have to individually fight our battles for our child and within our family, it's a Band-Aid when we're still trying to fix something in these very broken systems, right? We need to obviously get them what they need, but until we fix what's up here, we're going to just keep fighting those battles over and over and over again. And, what you said, Kelley, is, ensure that we have diverse voices at every table across demographics and disabilities in every conversation. We all need to be in the room where it happens, right? Especially disabled individuals, as you said. And, which also means that our kids need to be in the room where it happens. And so let's talk about inclusion, right? You've talked about this, one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Inclusion is for everyone, not just a gilded certain subset of people. Even within disability labels, there can be a divide or a stigmatized hierarchy, because inclusion in reality often comes with caveats and a subjective intention. So let's define it. So Kelley, how do you define inclusion, and where do you see the biggest barriers to inclusion for disabled children and their families?
So again, I'm speaking as a non-disabled person who is coming into this space as a caregiver and as an ally, and getting so much of my information and my lessons from disabled leaders. Very many of the experts I sourced for the book were disabled themselves, and I'm elevating them every chance I get. Inclusion is we are including everyone and not just saying, oh, you can come, but saying you are invited to participate fully with any accommodation that your full participation requires. And accommodations are not extra. Talking to Rebecca Coakley of the Ford Foundation, who has been doing very high-level disability rights and justice work her whole career and is disabled herself, in my conversations with her, her emphasis on accommodations are not extra. They're not something, a bonus. My child brings his service dog to the mall and not, oh, he's lucky, we should all bring our dogs to the mall. No, the dog is specifically trained in tasks to mitigate the disability and allow him to fully participate and be included in his community. And when we teach all children, not just our children with disabilities, that accommodations are not extra, that also allows for understanding in the classroom when a child needs different supports, different seating, a ramp, more time to take a test, a different environment, a service like speech therapy, occupational therapy. Kids should understand and have a basic knowledge that disability is neither good nor bad. We are not giving them an extra bonus. What we are doing is ensuring that everyone has the ability and the opportunity to achieve and to succeed and to be included as much as anyone else.
I actually, after reading your book, I quoted Rebecca today. Yes, earlier today, what was I doing? I was in my daughter's IEP because, it's so fun, right? Yes. But I did when I was talking about accommodations, and it's like, because she's going on to high school next year, the scary unknown. And I'm like, we just need the whole team to know accommodations aren't extra. So anyway, thank you, Rebecca, because I love that because it's true. And because sadly, we've seen that attitude of real resentment,
Yes.
towards, which is, profoundly befuddling to me. But besides that, I would love to dig in to inclusive education a little more specifically about education, because inclusion is often first seen at the school level, right? And it's essential, like you said, for kids to value all of their peers as peers and to really appreciate neurodiversity as part of the human experience instead of seeing disability as something that's hidden away in a room at the end of the hallway. So, Kelley, why should inclusive education be a priority for every educator, parent, and even medical professionals and providers?
Inclusive everything should just be a priority because, of course, it should. As the parent of a child who has multiple disabilities that span medical, cognitive, behavioral, sensory, he just is an overachiever and he just checks all the boxes. And we talk about everything before I ever discuss or share it. And we're very big on involving him and consent and self-advocacy and including him. And you are absolutely right that it is a big leap because it happens so much at school where the parents aren't present and the child is often having a first opportunity to be independent of parents, regardless of the support levels that they need in order to function appropriately and achieve appropriately throughout their school day. And I have a child who is best served and is doing very well in school with his days split between a special education classroom and a general education classroom. For some children, a much more specialized special education environment is the right fit. For very many children, being fully included in a general education classroom with the appropriate supports and services in order for them to access their education, This is the lingo. Use that for your school district. That's what you need to say. In order to access their education, every child is entitled under federal law to receive a free and appropriate public education. And what we need to look at first for children, because it's the law, is placing them in the least restrictive environment. A general education class at a school is the least restrictive environment. And we can look at things that are more restrictive. Adding a one-to-one aid, for example, is a support that, yes, would make the environment a bit more restrictive for the child, but would allow that child to access a general education classroom with the supports for medical needs, for behaviors, for academic needs, for many different things. And it would be great if there was just one thing that fit for everybody and my kid checks this box, so he goes here. Okay, cool. But what we're really looking for is appropriate, because that is what is guaranteed under federal law. I'm not a lawyer. I am not a doctor. I am not going to give medical or legal advice, but it is important for all of us to have a very basic working knowledge of disability rights and advocacy, and certainly when they go into the school system, so that we understand what our child is legally entitled to, what school districts are obligated to provide, and use that to best serve and support our children exactly as they are. Children with disabilities, anybody with disabilities, like it's not a thing that we're trying to quote unquote fix. My kid is not broken. What we are looking to do is say, I see you. I see who you are. Let's start from there and build on that. And you know what? That's what we do with every child.
Right. And these kids in school who need to be surrounded by what the world actually is, which the world is neurodiverse. Let's stop pretending that it's not.
Yes,
And
full of disability and neurodiversity. Some people consider disability, some don't.
Right. Exactly.
It's
exactly.
all the things. Yes.
Exactly. Right. Diversity across, but when you grow up and you don't see it, and you are taught that, if somebody looks or walks or acts or learns differently, right, then they are shipped off somewhere and they're not allowed to sit
into the hall.
lunch, right? And these are the kids that are growing up to be our neighbors, our bosses, our employees, our colleagues. And so, it has to start from the beginning, where then, when, we had a conversation the other day, Kelley, and you were talking to me about experiences when, your son sometimes likes to communicate loudly and in different ways, just like my daughter does. And guess what? When you're going to school and you're raised and you're around all kinds of kids who communicate, in different ways, then, when they're sitting in an interview or you're sitting next to them in an ice cream shop or whatever it might be, it's not a thing, right? It's just part of life. And that's what it's about, right? It's
absolutely. And we're so fortunate. My son is at a public school with a very large population comparatively of other children with visible disabilities, meaning that you can look at them and reasonably know that they are disabled. And what that does to the fabric of the school is it just makes disability, yep, it's Thursday. Aaron's eating lunch with his feeding tube, just like he does. Oh, just like he did yesterday on Wednesday. The feeding tube, the communication device, the loud, enthusiastic squeals at airplanes. These are all things my child does. I have another child who is not disabled. He does not do those things unless he's joining in the fun with us. It becomes just part of life. And all of those kids who on the first day of school might not have known how to interact with my kid are seeing him on the playground, playing, laughing, like doing all of the things. And we should all be so lucky. Like, man, I wish I had had that.
Right. And also, to be clear, when I was saying, obviously that's a huge part of inclusion. It's also about getting an equitable standards-based education. which frequently doesn't always happen in the, even in really well-intentioned special education classes. And it's not, and this isn't, like you said, there's a placement, the priorities of each family, which hopefully are very child-led. That's what we should be listening to and following the cues of our children on what's right for them. But it's also, it's a very layered conversation that is backed by 40 years of research, yet the discrimination has been normalized for this long because that's how people grew up. That's what they were used to. So that's, one, obviously the education system, another huge barrier. And, we're talking about these broken systems, like you said, not broken kids, broken systems. And in a life where news about our kids is frequently delivered with an apology or discomfort, your book opens talking about ableism, which I loved. I mean, it immediately, I knew this is the book that I wish I had read right from the beginning. But that can be a really scary topic to broach, for new parents. So why did you make that choice?
I made that choice because I would say I didn't even make that choice because it wasn't deciding if I should do this or not. As I spoke with so many disabled experts and leaders and friends, it became so necessary. The first chapter of the book is now all about getting comfortable with disability. And that necessarily was and is chapter 1, because we need to talk about the ableism. What is that? Biased against people based on their disability. And it can look all sorts of ways. Our children can and will and do experience internalized ableism. I've been so thankful to so many leaders who have said, I am successful, I am happy, I am accomplished all of these things, and I still, as an adult, struggle with internalized ableism. And if we, as parents and caregivers, can really address ourselves, then we can really look at our children not through the lens of, oh, you poor thing, and also not through the lens of, you're an inspiration because you're wearing pants. No, my kid's 10, he's a dude, he's not an inspiration, he's just a 10-year-old kid. We start to just view our children and friends and leaders and coworkers as full and complete humans in every sense. If someone needs a mobility aid or a service dog or a speech device, eyeglasses, right? If eyeglasses weren't so prevalent and you'd never seen anyone wearing eyeglasses and I walked in wearing these, you might be like, whoa, what is that thing on your face? And you are not going to get this job. What? No, but because eyeglasses are so prevalent, that is an accommodation that is a reality for almost everyone, except my sister, which drives me crazy.
Especially for those of us who can't do the contact.
Yes.
Well, Kelley, I would love to know, because I think a lot of parents can really think of that really horrible moment, but what is the first situation where you remember ableism really punching you in the gut? And I ask this not, just to share a horrible story, but because, there might be a lot of people who are still in the process of identifying what that means, what that feels like, or, how they are internalizing ableism as well.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up, because these hard stories are what we need to own up to and talk about so that we understand how this is showing up for ourselves, for one another, for friends who don't know today that they're getting a diagnosis for their kid tomorrow. There is so much at play here. And looking at our journey, I knew just the intuition, even before the doctors had started giving us a whole list of diagnoses, that something was going on, that my son was disabled. And right there, that feeling of, and now I feel like I'm falling down a bottomless pit because this is awful. This is the worst thing that could happen to my child and my family. And what a load of ignorance and ableism and bias and like, what? He has an undiagnosed genetic syndrome. We don't have a roadmap for him still at 10 years old and has many subdiagnoses within that. And the total ignorance for me to piece disability together with just how awful this is, like, what? I made things so hard for myself by not being in community with disabled people and by letting all the ignorant things take over. And I did an okay job. My kids seem to be doing well. I don't think I've, failed as a human or as a parent. But man, I made it so much harder on myself by really digging into the ignorance and the ableism of, oh, disabled, this is inherently a bad thing. Nope. Like, there are hard things that come with my child's disability. Seizures are hard. Chronic vomiting is hard. Like, there's medical stuff that I wish he didn't have to deal with. It's awful to see your child suffering. But there are many parts of who he is as a disabled person that, cool, that's just him.
I love, Kelley, that when I asked you this question, that you're basically telling me, which is a really brave answer, but that your own ableism punched you in the gut.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
It
right?
was me. It was my own fault.
Because when I was thinking about this, I just have to say it really quickly. The first thing that came to my mind was, and sitting in front of one of my daughter's specialists when she was a baby, that told me that our entire focus should be about keeping her quiet and polite, so she wouldn't bother wouldn't bother anyone, wouldn't make them uncomfortable, and then she could just sort of, like, be in the room. I mean, literally, that's almost a quote. And then told us that we would be lucky if she grew up to be a Walmart greeter. And she, which, I mean, I'm going through all of the emotions of trying, and, so when I think about that moment, like, even when I said before, the feelings that I have of what I would say now to that person, and I don't think I was just in complete shock from all of it, but it would be a very different response and reaction now. But, it's those moments also, though, when you can look back and feel those shifts in yourself and see then how you start seeing it in yourself, you start seeing it in others, and then you can start changing the perspective and the approach and the story and the reactions and everything else.
Yes, absolutely. And also, when we acknowledge all of these feelings and the things and the ableism and other, we can validate, this is where I am. I understand why I'm feeling this way, because all of this messaging, I talk about the lack of representation of actual disabled people in the media, in our world, in our leadership positions. And we can start from there and learn and do better. And that's what we want for all of our kids, is if this parenting journey makes us into better humans, we'll see. I'm a work in progress. Then I feel like we should all be so lucky.
Right. Well, that actually really makes me think of one of my favorite quotes from your book, which is, I'm not out to change my child, I'm out to change the world, right? Because again, you're not trying to fix your son. And you also mentioned, we have to touch on it because you mentioned it before, is the inspirational one, right? Yeah. So that's the other perspective that we need to eradicate, where our kids are super special, which we'll also talk about the special. But Kelley, what do you do? And I'm sure this has happened to all of us, but if someone sees you in the grocery store with your son and tells you that he's a huge inspiration?
Oh my gosh. The honest answer is that it really depends on the situation and my energy level and the tasks that I'm doing to manage and support my child in the moment. I don't always have the bandwidth and the 8 arms to advocate and to teach other humans. So sometimes I just and walk the other way. There's a remarkable TED Talk by a woman advocate comedian named Stella Young, who's unfortunately no longer with us. That is, I believe the title is I Am Not Your Inspiration. She is disabled herself, and she addresses this in such a beautiful and bold and funny and head-on way. Again, because my child leaves the house in a disabled body and goes to the grocery store and helps me put some baby carrots into the cart, that's not inspiring. It's just a 10-year-old who has tasks to help out mom at the grocery store because I need all the help I can get. When I have the bandwidth, I do address it. And I say, you know what? If he chooses to do inspirational things with his life and to be an inspiration, he can do that right now. And I rely so much on Stella Young and her wisdom and advocacy. He hasn't done anything yet. Like he's just here being a person. By calling out the, oh, but he's a superhero. Like, it would be so inconvenient if he could like walk through walls or become invisible, because he's got all different kinds of ideas of safety than I do. So we're working on that. But like I'm good with the not superhero thing. He is a human with easy things, hard things, talents, challenges. Like, he is all the things. And by pigeonholing anyone as you're a pity, you're an inspiration, like, what? Then I'm telling my kid he has to be an inspiration. And if he's like, actually, I want to work at Trader Joe's, or I want to be a bus driver, or whatever, be the politician, please be a politician. He gets to choose, and by foisting this pity or superhero-ness upon someone, we're really not giving them the opportunity to be a human and to choose their path. We're just patronizing them, and nobody needs that.
Yeah. I also mentioned we've touched on special, and this can be rightfully so, right along the lines of what we're talking about, a real trigger word in disability culture, because language matters. So is it disabled, has a disability, special needs, differently abled, or something else?
Thank you for asking this. This is so important. And it was so important that there was no place to get this answer other than from disabled colleagues, leaders, friends, and experts who are disabled themselves. I've interviewed and spoken with so many disabled adults for this book and in my life. I've literally never had anyone correct me and say, no, I have special needs. Call me special. No, because that's nothing. It's very infantilizing. It's something that comes from non-disabled people. And special needs is the language that I used to use. Why did I used to use that? Because that was the thing. Because most of us were taught, as you said, saying the word disability is bad. It's negative. Oh, I can't say that kid is disabled. Like, no, my kid's real disabled. It's cool. By saying special, differently abled, like whatever term we've created, and not using the word disability, not saying the word disabled, we are inherently implying that I can't say that. That's bad. Don't say disabled. It's bad. I'm not dissing my kid. Like, he's just disabled. Like, that's just that of the community that he is a part of. The word disabled is the word that is used in law. It is the word that is chosen by the disability community. And it is because it is used in law, that is what offers the legal protections. So very objectively, when I'm having this conversation, I can say, and often do say, that is a word that offers my child the legal protections that he needs in order to be included, in order to fully participate in all the things he wants to participate in. And we need to think about how much we are hand-holding ourselves and saying, oh, my kid's special, he's not disabled. Is that for you or is that for your kid? The adult next to you doesn't want you to say they're special. Like, yuck. I know it can be controversial and discussed and all of that. And you know what's exciting about language and all language is that it is evolving. And if the evolution of language is led by the people with the firsthand experience, I am reporting what I have been told over and over and over from people with the firsthand experience. And so I'm saying, I know better, I will do better because I respect you. This is what we're doing. We are saying disabled. There is so much conversation about person-first language versus identity-first language. And what we mean by that is saying person first, child with a disability, identity first, disabled child. And there are very compelling arguments on either side. Ideally, each individual person would be able to say, hey, this is my language preference. Great. I don't have the time to talk to every single human. So there you go. My son's communication is emerging and evolving. I greatly hope one day he will be able to correct everything I say, my slang, my disability language, all the things. And for him, and for the title of the book, and I've had so many conversations about, do you say parenting a disabled child? Do you say parenting a child with disabilities? Because it varies so wildly and because there is so much validity, I use both when I am referring to my child, when I am talking about individuals, and I try very hard to base the language choice on the context and the situation and what is relevant. If we are specifically talking about the disability within that context in a way that is relevant, that places him within that community, absolutely, I will say disabled child. If I am talking about kids and hanging out with moms at the park, and I am really centering my child as a person, I will use person first language, and I might say child with a disability. So for me, it depends on the context, and I'm really fostering my own son's self-advocacy and communication, and I hope we can one day have super nerdy discussions about language together because I live for that stuff. And I love when people correct me who are actually coming from a place of firsthand experience, because, oh my gosh, I am going to get so much wrong, but I'm going to keep trying. And if you are willing to teach me, like, I will take that. Yes.
I love the thought, and I started having thoughts of my daughter arguing with me and putting me in my place, which she loves to do on a daily basis. So I too look forward to the day where
Yes.
she likes correcting me and putting my place.
Awesome.
So I look forward to that conversation. I want to sort of switch gears because something that you talk about a lot that I think is a really important conversation is this conversation around caregiving as a job, and about 40% of American parents will leave the workforce to care for a child with disabilities. So first, can you explain the difference between parenting and caregiving?
Mm-hmm. We are so often pigeonholed into this role of all the caregiving stuff, the paperwork, the planning, the appointments, the calendar Tetris that we have to figure out for our children who have 64 people on their team like yours does. And that is not unusual. That is quite common. And I would imagine many people have more, and those are people in the regular rotation. We all know what parenting is. When we are not viewing caregiving as a job, it is very easy for me to look at myself and my life and my management of all the things and my ability to just go to the park at any moment with my kids and just be a mom and be the fun mom. When I can't do all of those things and I'm not viewing caregiving as a job, I just feel like a failure. There are never enough hours in the day. There are always things to do. There are always things to learn. There's so much I don't know. Like, there's a lot I don't know about neurology, but boy, we spend a lot of time at the neurologist's office. When we are able to view the caregiving stuff, which looks different for everyone, it might be ordering medical supplies. It might be finding a school when there doesn't seem to be one that exists in your area that is appropriate for your child. It might be, wiping vomit out of your hair for many years, which, like, right? I'm not the only one, right?
You're not.
It is all the things. When the needs are exponential, the job of caregiving can be, and very often is, exponential. By viewing caregiving as a job, it allows us to get practical about all of the stuff. It might never be fun to call your insurance company, to figure out social services, to reapply for your benefits every year, but it can be made sustainable and manageable long-term. For many of us, this is a full-time and forever job. And you're right, many people do necessarily leave the workforce. But when we know that we are the executives of the workforce of our house, we are able to give ourselves the grace of taking the emotional load out of that piece and not viewing our children as, oh, you're the problem. No, you know what the problem is? That I was on the phone for an hour and a half with my insurance company. That's the problem. That's why I'm grouchy. But you know what, kids? You guys are awesome. And with our backpack of medical supplies and our service dogs and all the things, let's go to the park. And when we're able to view caregiving as the job that it is, we are able to seek support, we are able to be objective, and we are able to give ourselves over to the joy of parenting and learning what amazing children or what amazing humans our children are becoming. And it allows us to reclaim ourselves as people and as parents when we really own this caregiving role.
Well, I have to ask about the identity piece, because all of these things that you're talking about, with caregiving as non-disabled parents of a disabled child, it can be really tricky, right? For a lot of the reasons that you've talked about. But, it's a 24/7 gig, and it doesn't help that every appointment we walk into, we lose our name and it's, hey, mom, right? Like every time it's like, mom, so what's going on, right? I mean, as one of many examples, but how can parents honor both their child's full identity and their own?
Yes, and I'm so glad you got this. You got this in the last few minutes as we were wrapping up. Everyone come to our Q&A after. For me, disability is not my identity, but disability gives a tremendous amount of structure to my life. And not saying I am going to be out in front of all the disability things for my kid and for all disabled people, allows me to say I'm a person within this structure. I can be a part of the advocacy. I can be an ally. I can line up behind disabled leaders. I can teach my child to self-advocate to the fullest extent possible. But the caregiver identity is mine to own. And we need to give ourselves that identity and own that and acknowledge maybe disability is your firsthand experience, but you have a different disability than your child. Maybe you're not advocating for the autism community because you have multiple sclerosis, but not autism. It's all messy. And as much as we can claim our own identity and stand into that, we don't need to erase who we are as humans, but we can say that disability is giving structure to our lives and our family and becoming a part of our identity in a way that is messy and complex, but also beautiful and important.
And, if we have, I think we might have just 1 minute, what about educators, medical professionals, other allies, right? How can they support families of kids with disabilities, right? If they're listening to this and, they have sort of a peripheral view, what can they do to support families and individuals with disabilities?
Be a partner. Build trusting relationships with communication. Listen to the parents so that the parents don't have to come in with a chip on their shoulder. You will be seeing your child's teacher over and over. Build a relationship with those parents. You want a long-standing relationship with your medical team, with caregiver support if you have that. And we need to listen to one another. We need to acknowledge that our professionals are the experts in their fields. And for the professionals, we need to acknowledge that the parents are the experts in their children. We need to listen to and hear what the parents are telling us. And we need to allow that information to shape our opinion as experts in education, in medicine, in social services. When we are able to be a team who trusts one another, even if that means giving answers that the parent might not want to hear, I trust that you will always be honest with me, even if I don't want to hear that thing. And we can have a trusting relationship that is lasting and best serves our children, because that is what all of this is about, and all parenting is really about.
And don't treat our children like a tragedy, right? Everything that we've said this entire time, don't sugarcoat it, give it to me straight. But this is not a tragedy. Right?
Yes.
I want to thank both of you for a really great conversation full of a lot of insight, a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. I know the people watching and people who will watch the video later will benefit just greatly from this. Great energy, great spirit, so much respect between the two of you as well. We are really honored to host both of you. I want to remind folks we've been placing in chat. We are going to be doing an after hours event with both Kelley and Lindsay, another 55 minutes with these two nice people. You can come, hang out, ask your own questions. The way that you get to come that is by buying a copy of Kelley's new book, Everything No One Talks About. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read it on your thing. I don't have it right from Everything No One Tells You. There we go. No one tells you about parenting a disabled child. Sorry about that. Buy a copy from our independent bookseller. They will send you a link to register for after hours in the email receipt that you get from the store. We're at 7:59, so we're tight on time. For the one person who submitted a quick question wanting to know if we would send the attendees a compilation of the resources in chat, just to let you know, when we send out the recording from the event, we always do include all of the relevant, we put a lot of different things in chat, but all the relevant links to articles and different things. We do always include that in the email that goes out with the recording. So you'll have all of those resources. You don't have to worry about trying to bundle them all up right now. And then, we're at 8 o'clock, so I am going to hold on that last question. There are a couple good questions. I hope those folks will come and hang out with us in after hours. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time, and for everyone watching. Hope to welcome you again, either on Zoom or in person to FAN. Thank you so much.
Thank you.